They say you can't miss what you never had, but I spent 15 years missing a family I couldn't remember. For my entire life, I was just a case number in a filing cabinet. Unwanted, unclaimed, and invisible. All I had to my name was a soaking wet photograph and a one-way bus ticket to a town that didn't know I existed. I was about to walk into the lion's den to face a woman known as the Iron Widow, armed with nothing but a desperate hope and a lie about who I was. I had no idea that the photo of a crumbling barn in my pocket held the dark answer to why my father vanished, or that a simple melody I hummed in my sleep would eventually bring a grown woman to her knees and unlock a future I never dared to dream of. But before I take you back to the day everything changed, please do me a quick favor. If you believe everyone deserves a place to call home, hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps the channel get these stories out to the world. Now let me tell you about the day I stopped being a ghost and started fighting for my life. The Greyhound bus smelled of stale diesel and other people's sleep, a scent that had become uncomfortably familiar to me over the last 48 hours. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching the world blur by. The concrete sprawl of the city, with its gray buildings and frantic energy, had long since given way to rolling green hills and stretches of timber that seemed to go on forever. I was 16 years old, but in the reflection of the glass, I looked older. My eyes were too guarded, my mouth set in a line that suggested I expected nothing from the world but a closed door. Technically, I was free. The judge had granted my petition for emancipation just last week. I had argued that I was capable of working, and that the group home environment was doing more harm than good. The system, tired of finding placements for a teenager who refused to speak or connect, had finally agreed. Independent living status was the polite, bureaucratic way of saying I was on my own. I had no family, no home, and no name that meant anything to anyone. I was just Leo. Leo the orphan. Leo the state case number. My hand went to the breast pocket of my denim jacket, my fingers brushing the rough edge of the photograph tucked inside. It was the only compass I had. It was a square, water-damaged picture that I had saved from the trash when I was moved from my first foster home to the group center. The image was grainy, faded by time and moisture, but the details were burned into my mind. A woman with dark hair, her face obscured by a smudge of water damage, standing in front of a massive twisted oak tree. Behind her, in the distance, was a barn with a distinctive steepled roofline that looked more like a chapel than a place for hay. That barn was the reason I was on this bus. It had taken me 3 months of sneaking onto the library computers, scouring image forums and architectural history sites, until a user named BarnHunter88 had identified the roofline. That's a Miller Dutch style they had typed. Distinctive framing, there's one just like that in a town called Greenleaf Hollow. Greenleaf Hollow. The name sounded like a fairy tale, the kind they read to the younger kids before lights out. But as the bus hissed its air brakes and began to slow, the reality outside the window looked far from magical. The town was a collection of faded brick buildings clinging to the side of a 2-lane highway. There was a gas station with a flickering sign, a diner with empty booths visible through the window, and a general store that looked like it had been standing since the Civil War. The bus driver pulled the lever, and the door accordioned open with a groan. "Greenleaf," he grunted, not looking at me. "End of the line for this route." I grabbed my duffel bag, containing 2 changes of clothes, a flashlight, and a Swiss Army knife I'd found in a park, and stepped down onto the cracked pavement. The heat hit me instantly, thick and heavy, smelling of pine needles and drying asphalt. It was quiet. Not the heavy, oppressive silence of the group home at night, but a wide, open silence that made me feel exposed. I adjusted my bag and walked toward the general store. The sign above the door read Jones General Provisions in peeling gold paint. A bell chimed as I pushed the door open, announcing my arrival to the dusty sun motes dancing in the air. The man behind the counter was wiping down the wood with a rag that looked older than I was. He was in his 60s, with thinning gray hair and a face that crinkled naturally into a look of curiosity. He paused, looking me up and down. I knew what he saw, a skinny kid in a thrift store jacket, boots that had seen better days, and a look of desperation I tried hard to hide. "Help you, son?" he asked. His voice was gravelly, but not unkind. "I'm looking for a place," I said. My voice sounded rusty. I hadn't spoken to anyone since I bought my ticket. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the photo. I placed it on the counter, careful of the fragile edges. "Do you know where this barn is?" The man, whose name tag read Mason, leaned in. He squinted, adjusting a pair of reading glasses on his nose. He studied the photo for a long moment, then looked back at me, his expression shifting from curiosity to something guarded. "That's the Miller place," Mason said softly. "About 5 miles up the North Road. But that picture's old. Real old." "Is it still there?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "The barn is. The tree is," Mason said. He wiped his hands on his apron. "But I wouldn't go wandering up there if I were you. That's Martha Miller's land. Folks around here call her the Iron Widow. She doesn't take kindly to trespassers, and she definitely doesn't take kindly to strangers. She's private, to a fault. I just want to see the architecture." I lied, the excuse tasting like ash in my mouth. "I'm a student." Mason looked at me, and I knew he didn't believe me. But he didn't push. He just sighed and pointed out the window. "Follow the road north. When the pavement turns to gravel, keep walking. You'll see the oak tree. Can't miss it. It's twisted like a corkscrew." "Thanks," I said, taking the photo back. "Son," Mason called out as I reached the door. I turned. She's had a hard life. The farm is falling down around her ears, and she's too proud to ask for help and too stubborn to sell. Just be respectful." "I will," I said. The walk took me nearly 2 hours. The paved road gave way to gravel, just as Mason had said, and the houses became fewer and farther between until there was nothing but overgrown fields and dense woods. The heat was relentless, sweat trickling down my back, but I didn't stop. I felt a magnetic pull, a terrifying hope that I tried to squash down. "Don't expect anything," I told myself. "It's just a barn, just a picture. It doesn't mean you belong." Then I saw it. The oak tree was massive, its trunk gnarled and twisted in a way that looked impossible, ancient limbs reaching out like frozen lightning. And behind it, rising from a sea of waist-high thistle and wild grass, was the barn. It was gray now, the red paint long since stripped away by wind and rain, and the roof sagged dangerously in the middle, but the shape was undeniable. I walked up the long driveway, the gravel crunching loudly under my boots. The farmhouse was to the left, a Victorian structure that had once been white but was now a dull, peeling gray. The porch leaned to one side, and the windows were dark. I heard a sound, a grunt of exertion, and the scrape of heavy fabric on dirt. I rounded the corner of the house and froze. An older woman was trying to drag a 50-pound feed sack across the yard toward a chicken coop that looked like a strong wind would knock it over. She was small, her hair a steel gray bun tied against her head, wearing a faded floral dress with a man's oversized work coat over it. She was pulling with everything she had, but the sack was snagged on a root. She looked up and saw me. Her eyes were sharp, blue like ice, and narrowed instantly. She didn't look afraid, she looked furious. "I don't buy magazines, and I don't need Jesus," she snapped, her voice surprisingly strong. "Get off my land." She assumed I was a solicitor. Or worse. I stood there, paralyzed for a second. This was Martha, the Iron Widow. My grandmother? The word felt alien in my head. "I'm not selling anything," I said. "Then you're trespassing," she retorted, wiping her forehead with the back of a dirty glove. "If you're with Buddy Smith and that development company, you tell him I've got a shotgun, and I'm not afraid to use the rock salt loads." She turned back to the sack, heaving at it again. She stumbled, her foot slipping in the dust. She let out a sharp gasp of pain and clutched her lower back. I didn't think. I just moved. I dropped my duffel bag and walked past her. She stiffened, looking like she might actually strike me, but I didn't look at her. I grabbed the feed sack by the corners, bent my knees, and hoisted it onto my shoulder. It was heavy, smelling of grain and dust, but I was used to physical labor. I'd spent summers working landscaping for the group home. "Where does it go?" I asked, turning to her. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open. The hostility hadn't left her eyes, but it was clouded by confusion. She pointed a shaking finger toward the coop. Been inside the door. I walked to the coop, ducked my head, and dumped the sack into the metal bin. I dusted my hands off on my jeans and walked back out. Martha was still watching me, her posture rigid. I looked down at the dirt near her boots. Half buried in the dust was a wooden sign that had clearly fallen off a post weeks, maybe months ago. It read, "Help wanted. Inquire within." I bent down, picked up the sign, and held it out to her. "I'm not with the developer," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'm Leo. I saw the sign." Martha snatched the sign from my hand. "That's old. I can't afford to pay anyone. Barely got enough to feed the chickens, let alone a hired hand." "I don't need money," I said. The lie came easily because, in a way, it was the truth. I needed answers, but I couldn't buy those. "I need a place to sleep. I'll work for food and a place to sleep. That's it." She scrutinized me, her eyes raking over my worn clothes, the darkness under my eyes. She was looking for the trick. She was looking for the con. "You a runaway?" she asked sharply. "No, ma'am. I'm 18. I lied. It was safer than explaining my emancipation papers. "Just traveling." "Why here?" she asked. "This place is a wreck. Nothing here but work and dust." "I like quiet," I said, "and I don't mind work." She stood there for a long time, the silence stretching between us, filled only by the buzzing of cicadas. She looked at the heavy sack I had moved, then back at my face. She was weighing her pride against her desperation. I could see the farm was drowning her. The fences were broken, the roof was leaking, the weeds were winning. She was losing a war of attrition against nature. Finally, she let out a sharp breath through her nose. She pointed a gloved hand toward a small, leaning structure near the barn. "That's the tool shed. There's a cot in the back and a wood stove that smokes if you don't open the flue right. No electricity, no running water in there." "That's fine," I said. "If you're still here in the morning," she said, her voice hard as granite, "you can start clearing the south fence line. It's overgrown with brambles. If you quit, you walk back to town. I don't drive." "I won't quit," I said. "We'll see," she muttered. She turned and walked back toward the house, her gait stiff and painful. She didn't look back. "Dinner's at 6. Don't be late, and wash your hands at the pump before you come to my porch." I watched her go, a small, defiant figure against the gray house. I picked up my bag and walked to the shed. It was dark inside, smelling of oil, old wood, and mice. I found the cot, unfolded a musty wool blanket, and sat down. I pulled the photo out of my pocket again. I looked at the woman, my mother, presumably, and then out the dirty window at the twisted oak tree. The tree was the same, the barn was the same, but the warmth I had imagined, the welcoming embrace of family, that was missing. I was here. I had my foot in the door. Now I just had to survive the Iron Widow long enough to find out who I was. The first week was a blur of exhaustion. I woke with the sun, my body aching from the damp cold of the shed, and worked until the light failed. Martha wasn't kidding about the work. The farm had been neglected for years, maybe a decade. It was as if time had stopped here while the rest of the world moved on. I attacked the south fence line with a machete and a pair of rusty wire cutters I found in the shed. The brambles were thick, armed with thorns that tore at my canvas jacket and scratched my face. It was brutal, mindless work, and I loved it. It kept my mind off the emptiness. Every swing of the blade was a release of the anger I'd been carrying for 15 years. Anger at the system, anger at the parents who left me, anger at the world for making me fight for every scrap of ground. I cleared 50 yards the first day. Martha came out at noon with a jar of iced tea and a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. She set it on a fence post, watched me for a moment, and walked away without a word. It was a test. Everything was a test. By the third day, I had cleared enough brush to see the rotting posts. I started replacing them, digging new holes with a post hole digger that weighed 20 pounds. My hands blistered, then popped, then calloused over. We fell into a rhythm. Breakfast was oatmeal, eaten on the back porch steps because she didn't invite me inside. Lunch was silent. Dinner was the only time we spoke, and even then, it was sparse. "Roof's leaking on the west side," she'd say, staring at her plate of beans and cornbread. "I'll tarp it tomorrow," I'd reply. "Chicken wire needs patching." "I'll get to it." I watched her when she didn't think I was looking. She was lonely. It radiated off her like heat from a stove. She would sit in her rocking chair in the evenings, staring out at the empty fields, her hand absent-mindedly rubbing the armrest. She looked like she was waiting for someone who was never coming back. One evening, about 2 weeks in, I was fixing the steps to the porch. The wood was rotted through, dangerous. I had found some spare lumber in the barn and was measuring it out. Martha came out with 2 glasses of lemonade. It was the first time she'd offered me a drink that wasn't strictly necessary for survival. She sat in the rocker and watched me saw the wood. "You handle tools well," she observed. "Who taught you?" "Shop teacher," I said, not looking up. "Mr. Henderson said I had good hands." "My son had good hands," she said quietly. It was the first time she had mentioned him. My heart skipped a beat. He could fix anything. Engines, wood, didn't matter. He had a touch. "What happened to him?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral, focusing on the saw blade biting into the pine. The silence stretched so long I thought she wasn't going to answer. "He died," she said, her voice flat. "Long time ago, construction accident in the city, fall from a scaffold." "I'm sorry," I said. "Don't be," she snapped, the hardness returning instantly. "It was a long time ago. Life goes on. Or it's supposed to." She stood up abruptly and went inside, leaving the lemonade sweating on the railing. I stopped sawing. I looked at the glass, the ice melting. He died. My father. I had always assumed he was alive somewhere. Maybe in prison, maybe just a guy who didn't want a kid. But he was dead. A construction accident. I felt a strange hollowness. I had come here to find him, or at least find the people who knew him. I had found his mother, but she was a fortress with the drawbridge pulled up. I finished the step as the sun went down, hammering the nails in with more force than necessary. I was angry again. Dead. He was dead, and I was here, a ghost haunting his mother's farm, and she didn't even know it. The breakthrough didn't happen with words. It happened with flour. It was raining, a slow, steady drizzle that made outside work impossible. Martha called me to the back door. "No sense sitting in the shed," she said. "Come inside. I'm baking." I stepped into the kitchen. It was the heart of the house, warm and smelling of yeast and wood smoke. It was cluttered, but clean, filled with knickknacks and jars of preserves. It felt lived in. It felt like a home. "Wash up," she ordered. "I can't knead this dough today. My arthritis is flaring up something fierce." She pointed to a massive ceramic bowl filled with dough. I washed my hands at the sink, scrubbing the grease from under my fingernails with a harsh yellow soap. I dried them and approached the table. "Fold it, push it, turn it," she instructed, standing beside me. "Don't fight it. You have to work with it." I dug my hands into the warm, elastic dough. It felt alive. I followed her instructions, falling into the rhythm of the motion. Fold, push, turn. Fold, push, turn. "Softer," she corrected, reaching out. Her hand covered mine for a split second. Her skin was like parchment paper, dry and thin, but her grip was strong. "Like this. It's not a fence post, Leo. It's bread." I slowed down. I matched her breathing. We stood there for 20 minutes, working the dough in silence. The tension that usually hung between us began to dissipate, replaced by the simple, shared task. "You're a good worker, Leo," she said softly, staring at the dough. "I haven't had help like this since before." "I like it here," I said, and I realized I meant it. Despite the hard work, despite the shed, despite the grief hanging over the place, I liked the quiet. I liked the smell of the rain. I liked standing in this kitchen. "You remind me of him," she whispered. "The way you stand. The quiet." She looked up at me, and for a second I thought she knew. I thought she saw through the lie. But then she shook her head, as if shaking off a ghost. "Put it in the bowl," she said, her voice returning to its usual briskness. "Let it rise. Then we bake." That night I ate fresh bread with butter, sitting at the kitchen table across from her. We didn't talk much, but she pushed the butter dish toward me without me asking. It was a small thing, but to me, it felt like a banquet. The summer storms in the valley were violent things. They rolled in over the hills like bruising purple welts on the sky, bringing wind that whipped the trees into a frenzy. It was late August when the big one hit. I woke up in the shed to the sound of thunder that rattled my teeth. The wind was howling, and I could hear the terrifying crack of branches snapping. I grabbed my flashlight and ran out into the rain, the barn. I sprinted through the mud, the rain stinging my face like needles. The barn doors were banging against their frames. I wrestled them shut, dropping the heavy wooden bar into place. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of ozone and frightened animals. The few chickens Martha had left were clucking frantically in their coop in the corner. Then I heard it, the drip. It wasn't just a drip. It was a steady stream of water pouring down from the high loft, soaking the floorboards. If the water got into the old hay stored up there, the rot would spread. Or worse, the wet hay could ferment and catch fire. I grabbed a tarp from the tool bench and scrambled up the wooden ladder to the loft. It was pitch black up there, my flashlight beam cutting through the dust motes. The roof was leaking badly around the old cupola. I threw the tarp over the hay bales, tucking the edges in. The thunder cracked again, directly overhead, a sound like a bomb going off. The barn shook. I crouched down, heart racing. I hated storms. In the group home, storms meant power outages, crying kids, and the staff yelling. I closed my eyes, trying to center myself. Without thinking, I started to hum. It was a melody that lived in the back of my brain, buried deep under layers of trauma and forgetting. I didn't know the words, just the tune. It was a lilting, melancholic sound rising and falling like a breath. I hummed it when I was scared. I hummed it when I was alone. It was my anchor. Da-da-dum. I didn't hear the barn door open. I didn't hear her climb the ladder. The beam of another flashlight hit me, blinding me. I stopped humming, shielding my eyes. "Leo?" Martha's voice was a shriek, barely audible over the rain. I stood up. "I'm tarping the hay! The roof leaked!" She scrambled up the last few steps, breathless, her hair wild and wet, soaking wet in her nightgown and boots. She wasn't looking at the hay. She was looking at me with an expression of pure terror. "That song!" she gasped, stepping toward me. She grabbed my shoulders, her fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "Where did you hear that song?" I don't know," I stammered, frightened by her intensity. "I just hum it, when I'm scared." "You can't just know it," she cried, shaking me. Tears were mixing with the rain on her face. "Nobody knows that song. I wrote it. I wrote it for Caleb. I never sang it to anyone else. Never!" The world seemed to stop. The thunder faded into the background. This was it. The moment I had been terrified of. The moment I had been working toward. I reached into my soaking wet jeans pocket. The photo was in a plastic baggie I kept it in to protect it. I pulled it out. "I didn't learn it, Martha," I whispered. "I remember it." I held the photo out to her. Her flashlight beam fell on it. The water-damaged woman. The twisted oak. The barn. She stared at it. She made a sound that was half sob, half gasp. She looked up at my face, really looked at me, searching my eyes, my nose, the set of my jaw. She stripped away the grime, the age, the years of separation. "Leo?" she whispered. The name hung in the air, fragile as glass. "My Leo?" "I think so," I said, my voice breaking. "My name is Leo. I was in the system for 15 years. They said I was abandoned." Martha didn't scream. She didn't faint. She let out a wail of pure, agonizing relief and pulled me into her arms. It wasn't a polite hug. It was a desperate, clawing embrace. She buried her face in my wet coat, sobbing uncontrollably. "You came back," she cried. "Oh God, you came back. The music brought you back." I stood there in the dark, dusty loft, smelling the rain and the old hay, and felt her shaking against me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just holding myself together. Someone else was holding me. I wrapped my arms around her frail shoulders and buried my face in her wet hair, and I wept. I wept for the years alone, for the fear, for the relief. We stayed like that for a long time, until the storm passed and the only sound was the steady drip of the leak into a bucket. "Come inside," she said finally, pulling back and cupping my face in her hands. "You're not sleeping in that shed, not ever again. You're coming home." The next morning, the world looked different. The air was scrubbed clean, the sky a brilliant, painful blue. I was sitting at the kitchen table, but this time, I wasn't the hired hand. I was sitting in Caleb's chair. Martha, Grandma, though I couldn't say it yet, placed a stack of pancakes in front of me. Her eyes were red and swollen, but she looked lighter, years younger. But the joy was fragile. It was sitting on top of a mountain of questions. "Why?" I asked. I put my fork down. I couldn't eat. "If he was your son, if you're my grandmother, why was I there? Why was I alone for 15 years? Did he not want me?" The fear that had driven me here was still sharp. Was I a mistake? Martha's face crumbled. "No, Leo, never! You were his whole world!" She stood up. "Come with me." She led me up the narrow stairs to the second floor, to a door at the end of the hall that had always been closed. She opened it. A wave of heat and the smell of cedar hit me. It was the attic. She walked to a large steamer trunk in the corner and threw open the lid. It was filled with clothes, books, and a baseball glove. But on top was a stack of letters, tied with twine. "Read them," she said, handing them to me. "He wrote these. To you." I sat on the dusty floor and untied the twine. My hands were shaking. I opened the first one. It was dated a month after my first memory of the orphanage. "Dear Leo, the social worker says I can't see you until I get the apartment approved. I'm working double shifts at the site. My hands are tired, but I'm thinking of you. I'm going to get us a place with a yard. I promise. Just hold on, little man. Daddy's coming." I opened another, dated 6 months later. "To my Leo, I sent the money to the fund for your birthday. I hope they buy you that truck you wanted. The lawyer says we're close. I just need 2 more paychecks for the deposit. I miss you so much it hurts to breathe sometimes. I'm sorry I had to leave you there, but sleeping in the truck was no place for a baby. I'm doing this for you. We're going to go to Grandma's soon. The air smells like apples there. You'll love it." Tears blurred my vision. "He didn't abandon you," Martha said softly, kneeling beside me. "He lost his job. He lost his apartment. He was too proud to come back here because he and we had fought. About your mother, he wanted to do it on his own. He put you in temporary care because he thought it was safer than the streets. He was trying to build a life for you." "What happened?" I choked out. "The accident," she said, wiping a tear from her cheek. "He was working overtime, tired. He fell. He died 2 days before the court date to get you back. And you." I looked at her. "Why didn't you come?" "I didn't know where you were," she whispered, the shame evident in her voice. "Caleb and I were estranged. He didn't tell me where you were. When he died, the state, you just vanished into the system. I spent 10 years looking. I hired lawyers. I hired investigators. But because I wasn't on your birth certificate, they wouldn't tell me anything. I thought I'd lost you forever." She reached out and took my hand. "You weren't unwanted, Leo. You were fought for. He died fighting for you." I held the letters to my chest. The crushing weight of 15 years of rejection began to lift, replaced by a sorrow that was cleaner, sharper, but bearable. I wasn't trash. I was a son. We had a week of peace. I moved my things into Caleb's old room. It felt strange sleeping in a bed, waking up to the smell of bacon instead of the damp shed. I walked the farm with Martha, and she showed me the property lines, the orchard that needed pruning, the creek where she used to fish. "It's yours, you know," she said one afternoon as we stood by the oak tree. "All of it. Eventually. But the world has a way of testing you just when you think you're safe." A black SUV crunched up the driveway the next morning. A man in a sleek suit stepped out. It was Buddy Smith, the developer. I recognized him from the posters in town. He had a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Martha went rigid on the porch. "I told you to stay off my land, Buddy." "Now, Martha," he smiled, walking up the steps. "I'm just trying to help. The foreclosure notice was filed this morning. The county isn't going to wait anymore. 3 years of back taxes, Martha. It's over." He held out a folder. "Sell to me. I'll pay off the lien, give you enough for a nice condo in the city. It's better than the sheriff throwing you out." My blood ran cold. "Foreclosure? Get off my porch," Martha hissed. "You have until Friday," Buddy said, his smile fading. "Then the auction happens. And I'll buy it for pennies." He turned and looked at me. "You must be the hired help. Better start looking for a new job, kid." He drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and despair. Martha collapsed into the rocking chair. She looked defeated. "I didn't tell you," she whispered. "I was so depressed after Caleb. I stopped opening the mail. I stopped paying. I owe $20,000, Leo. I don't have it." "We can fix this," I said, though I had no idea how. "No," she said, closing her eyes. "It's gone. It's all gone. I refuse to accept it. I hadn't found my home just to lose it." I spent the afternoon pacing the yard, my mind racing. I needed to clear my head. I grabbed a crowbar and headed for the smokehouse. It was the only building I hadn't touched yet. It was overgrown with vines, the door jammed shut. I wrestled the door open. Inside, it was dark and smelled of ancient hickory smoke. I started clearing out the debris, rotten crates, old jars. I was angry, tearing at the junk. My crowbar hit something hollow in the back wall. A loose brick. I pulled the brick out. Behind it was a rusted metal box, a time capsule. I carried it out into the sunlight. My hands shook as I pried the lid open. Inside were trinkets, a dried flower, a baby's pacifier, and a photo. It was the other half of my picture. The woman, my mother, was smiling, holding a baby. Me. On the back, in handwriting that matched my own, was a note. "Sarah and Caleb and Leo. Forever. To our son. If you're reading this, know we loved you. I'm sorry I had to leave. The doctors say I don't have much time. I'm going with your dad to the city to make sure the papers are signed so he can keep you when I'm gone. I love you, my little lion." I stared at the note. My mother hadn't left me. She had died. She had been sick, and she had spent her last days ensuring I would be with my father. My little lion. Leo. Then, a memory sparked. Not my memory, but something from the letters. I sent the money to the fund, the safe box at First National. I ran to the house. "Grandma, the letters." He mentioned a bank. Martha looked up from the table where she was crying. "What?" "In the letters. He said he was saving for a house. He said he put it in a safe box. That was 15 years ago, Leo. The state would have taken it." "Maybe not," I said, my heart pounding. "If it was a safety deposit box, and nobody had the key, maybe it's still there. Unclaimed property." We drove into the city in Martha's battered truck. It took 3 hours. We walked into the bank, looking like a pair of scarecrows. Martha in her Sunday dress. Me in my clean jeans. We spent 4 hours in offices. We showed the death certificate. We showed my birth certificate. We showed the letters. The manager, a stern woman who softened when she saw Martha's desperation, made calls. "There is a box," she said finally. "In the name of Caleb Miller. Rent hasn't been paid, but the contents are being held by the state as unclaimed property." They brought the box out. They drilled the lock. Inside, there was no cash. My heart sank. Just papers. "Wait," the manager said. She pulled out a passbook. "It's a savings bond portfolio and a life insurance policy on Sarah Jenkins, naming Caleb Miller as beneficiary." She tapped a calculator. "With interest and the payout." She looked up, smiling. "It's $42,000. Martha grabbed the counter to steady herself. It wasn't a fortune. It wouldn't make us rich. But it was exactly enough. Friday came. Buddy Smith leaned against his SUV, looking at his watch. "Time's up, Martha," he called out. "Sheriff's on his way." I walked out onto the porch. I felt different. I stood taller. I wasn't looking at my feet anymore. "The sheriff can turn around," I said. I walked down the steps and handed him a cashier's check. "Taxes, plus interest, plus penalty fees," I said. "Paid in full." Buddy stared at the check, his face turned a blotchy red. "Where did you get this?" "My father left it for me," I said. "To save the farm." You're a drifter," he sputtered. "No," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "I'm a Miller. And you're trespassing." Buddy looked at the check, then at Martha, who was standing on the porch with a shotgun, broken open and empty, but sending a clear message. He scoffed, got in his car, and drove away. He didn't look back. I turned to Martha. She was smiling, tears streaming down her face again. But they were happy tears. That evening, the sun set over Greenleaf Hollow, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet. The air was cooling, carrying the scent of drying hay and ripening apples. I sat on the porch swing, the wood creaking gently beneath me. My body was tired, a good, heavy tiredness that came from work and purpose. Martha came out through the screen door. She held 2 glasses of lemonade. She handed one to me and sat down next to me. We swung in silence for a while, watching the lightning bugs start to blink in the tall grass near the twisted oak tree. The farm was safe. The roof would be fixed next week. The fences were mending. I looked at the tree. It was twisted, scarred by time and weather, but it was still standing. It had deep roots. "I used to hate my name," I said quietly, watching the condensation bead on the glass. In the orphanage, Leo was just a label, a file number. Martha reached over and covered my hand with hers. Her skin was rough, warm, and real. "It's a good name," she said firmly. "It means lion. It means strength. It belongs to this dirt. And so do you." I looked at her, then out at the land that had almost been lost, the land that my father had loved, the land my mother had visited to say goodbye. "Yeah," I said, a smile spreading across my face, genuine and deep. "I guess it does." I took a sip of the lemonade. It was sweet and tart, perfect. "I'm Leo Miller," I said, testing the weight of it. "And I'm home." The wind rustled through the oak leaves, sounding like a whisper of approval. Above us, the first star appeared, bright and steady, watching over the farm in the hollow, where the broken things had finally been put back together. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to The Farmer's Promise and turn on notifications so you never miss another tale of resilience, hidden truths, and the families we build when life gives us a second chance. Share this with someone who needs to hear it.